credit, and she is the sometimes department chair, although they rotate the role. But she's had many roles, and I'm sure a lot of you know her already through previous CalPro trainings, webinars, communities of practice, online courses, and work with OTAN and other professional development opportunities throughout California. So Christy has been working with this material about motivation and persistence for a while because we are creating a new um, community of practice for next year on this topic, which will be available for you to have come to your site or your region starting in probably August. So you're getting a preview today from Christy, who knows this material better than anyone. So thank you, and here's Christy.
Hi everybody, welcome. So glad to have you here today. I think this is a hot topic for all of us because we really love our career, our professions. Adult ed is something that we all have a passion about, and we want to help students overcome their barriers so that they can keep coming to our classes and succeed in our classes. So hopefully today you're going to walk away with some strategies that you can start using right away when you go back to class next week. So these are the objectives for today. By the end of this session, you will have identified common barriers adult students face in the classroom. You will be able to describe mindset and implement methods for helping students develop a growth mindset. And you will be able to define negative stereotype and apply a strategy for reducing its effect. Today we have a lot to cover in a short amount of time, so this is our agenda. We'll start with a brainstorm activity and a discussion of barriers our students face in our classrooms. Then we're going to go over some strategies that we can implement as a way to help students better approach the barriers they face. And then we'll give you a little bit more information about this new COP, Community of Practice, and the training modules on motivation and persistence of adult learners. So let's go ahead and get started. As I said, we're going to start with a brainstorm. So let's take a few minutes to brainstorm a list of internal barriers our adult learners face in the classroom. So we know there are external barriers that impact their attendance and participation and even success in our classes, things like lack of transportation or childcare or work schedules. And we can't always help students solve those issues. So let's focus on what we can do in our classrooms. In that large chat pod you see there, take about 3 minutes to list barriers that you know that your students face in the classroom. Remember, this is a brainstorm, so there are no wrong answers. We're just creating a list of difficulties our students may have. And we want to see if we can find ways to support them in these difficulties. So when you're ready, go ahead and begin. Okay, great. Right, John. I've seen that one before. Forgot my glasses at home. I think I'll have to leave today. Oh, Barbara, yes. You're right, Yetta. Sometimes they have perhaps an undiagnosed disability, and that can be a big challenge. So it sounds like Cecilia's students have a similar problem as John's. Leslie, I think what you're alluding to is extrinsic rather than intrinsic motivation. You're right, John. Even if their intentions are to keep practicing what they're learning outside of class, sometimes there's not enough time for homework, or they don't have that background that Lane talked about. Lack of formal education in their native country if they're an immigrant student, or negative past educational experiences, as Mary Louise said. Too old, exactly. That's what they may believe. Wow, you've come up with a really great list here. Some things it looks like the students could solve themselves if we just ask them to take that step to do those things, and others are from a history or even maybe baggage that they're coming to our classes with. Thank you, Christy. And yeah, you deal with a very unique set of students. And it looks like Barbara as well. They have to come to the class and maybe don't necessarily want to be in your class. So just about one more minute. You brought up some things that I hadn't actually thought of, so this is a great list. And Melissa, like you said, the older students may feel it's too late for them to learn or to perhaps start a career. Confidence. I think confidence is something we can help them with. Yes, you're right, Lane. Okay, so we'll give about 30 more seconds for this. Anything else that comes to your mind? So just take a moment to maybe scroll up as needed and just skim again what the other participants have entered in this chat pod. And a lot of these we actually cover in the full community of practice. Today, with our time being limited, we're going to talk about a few things that definitely relate to some of the barriers you've listed here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and move on. Looking over that list, it doesn't seem like there's one particular barrier that pops up. If you see one particular thing that pops up, go ahead and type that in. It seems like we saw the low self-esteem, lack of motivation, confidence seems to be something that has been repeated more than once. And that's interesting how you contrast that, Barbara. The younger students think they have it all figured out. Okay, let's look at if there is one barrier listed here, or maybe something else that comes to mind. What do you think is the most challenging barrier to help students overcome? You can type it in the same chat pod. The hardest barrier. And you may need to scroll down on the right side of the chat pod if you haven't. There's a lot more being entered there. So Barbara says, let's start with Elaine said confidence and having perhaps a lower level education. And I imagine, Elaine, you're speaking from the perspective of an ESL teacher, so you're talking about your immigrant students. Barbara says a denial that they have a problem, coming from the perspective of teaching formerly incarcerated students, I think it was, right? And I see confidence, confidence, confidence repeated quite a lot of times, and coming from their past experiences in school. Unidentified learning disabilities, and that's, there's not a lot we could necessarily do with that except to hopefully refer them if your agency has some sort of mechanism for testing students and getting them by law as required the support that they need. Communication, lack of education, age, okay? But it looks like confidence seems to be repeated quite a few times here. So it's great you're here today, because we're going to cover a strategy that we can help with. And I just wanted to say a barrier that not many have thought of. Well, when I look at this list, the glasses seems to be one that not so common in our students, but obviously more than one of us have had that before, that a student says, I forgot to wear my glasses. I guess I need to leave class today. I can't see anything. So that's an interesting barrier. Not a lot we can do except for to ask the students to remember. Yeah. Barbara says she keeps a box of glasses in her class. That's a great strategy right there. Yeah, so it turns out to be actually a common barrier. Who would have known? Okay, very interesting. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to start to move into the main content of today's session. And I think it's going to be really relevant, but we're going to start with simple things we can do. So we're going to start off by discussing 3 things we can do from the very beginning of our classes that can help students cope with some of these barriers that they face in the classroom. I know I've noticed this in my classes, but how about you? Have you ever noticed a particular point in time when the attendance drops in your class? It's going great, everything's fine, and then the following week you're wondering, where did everybody go? Well, according to a study in Britain called Curbing Student Attrition, they found that attendance by learners was steady at about 70% for the first 3 weeks, and then suddenly the attendance drops to 57% by the 9th week. Is that similar in your class? It probably has a little bit to do with if you offer semester or 16, 18-week long classes. In my particular program, it's 8 weeks. So I see that drop usually at week 5. So because the research does show that this tends to happen, this dropout in attendance, clearly we need to engage learners in the first 3 weeks of class, even the first day, in order to avoid that drop in attendance. So you will see that we need to engage students. Another important thing that we need to do is build community in the classroom. When students have made relationships with their classmates, they tend to stick around. And finally, we can include problem-solving activities. So this is when you know that there's a specific barrier some students in your class face. You could create a story, not identifying any particular student, and have the students list possible solutions, discuss, and have them use their critical thinking skills to select the best solution. This activity can actually engage students and build community. So what do? You see the 3 chat pods just below the slide. Engage students, build community, problem-solving activities. Do you do any of these activities in the beginning of your class or any time throughout your class, but particularly in the beginning? And if so, how do you do that? What does this look like in your classroom? How do you break the ice to build community? How do you engage students from the start? Go ahead and type in what you do. It looks like we have lots of great ideas for engaging students. So we'll take one more minute to type in any things that you do in the classroom to engage students, build community, help them come up with solutions to problems. After you have typed in what you do, take a moment to look at all three chat pods. I'm going to write down some of these ideas, really wonderful activities that you do in class to engage students, build community, help them solve problems. So I'd like to just point out a couple of things that came up right away that are supported by research. Well, obviously, it's good to learn students' names so that you can use them. Then they feel like part of the class. Yetta, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, one-on-one orientation, sitting down with the student and getting to know them. Once we get to know our students well and know why they are taking our classes and can diagnose their needs to get to the goal that they have in mind, we can really customize our lessons to help them get to where they need. And obviously, when students' needs are being met, they will be more motivated to keep coming to class because they know they're getting closer to their goals. So take one more minute or so just to look at each chat pod, see if there's something you would like to try. And Cecilia said sharing goals. So goal setting is part of this community of practice because it is such a research-proven, strong strategy to use to help students persist. About 30 more seconds. Okay. So many of the things you put here are actually part of this community of practice. So it sounds like you're doing a lot of the right things already. So today we're going to really hit on the one common barrier that we saw quite a lot in listing the barriers that you thought of in the brainstorm. And that has to deal with self-confidence, self-esteem, and I think that you'll get some good ideas from this next part. So we're going to go ahead and move on. And we're going to delve into some of these strategies that will take a little bit more effort and time. So have you ever heard of or read about mindset and the work of Carol Dweck? If you can just type a Y for yes or N for no in the left corner chat pod. Some of you yes, some of you no. Yes, and okay, so we've got a wide range of experience. Some of you have heard of this before and some of you not. So Carol Dweck is a researcher at Stanford, and her work is in the field of personality, social psychology, and developmental psychology. And this is one of her famous books right here that you see. Through her research, she has found that our beliefs about ourselves guide a large part of our lives. She calls this belief mindset. And there is growth mindset and the fixed mindset. You can see in front of you the definitions of growth and fixed mindsets. I'll give you just a moment to read those. Okay, so we're going to go over some of the differences between people with a fixed mindset and those with a growth mindset. Well, Carol Dweck's research, although it was conducted with school-age kids, really does apply equally to adults, and it can help us understand some of our students better. A person with a fixed mindset does not believe that a person's abilities can be improved. They think that we are either born with talent or not. But a person with a fixed mindset doesn't think that a person's intelligence can grow. Of course, we're teachers and we know better than that. So a growth mindset, a person who has this kind of mindset believes that improvement is possible through consistent practice. This person believes that we can grow our brains or has learned about neuroplasticity, the science that proves the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout life. Another difference is that people who have fixed mindsets tend to choose easier tasks, and they often resist taking on a difficult challenge. Whereas people with growth mindsets, they like challenges, and they embrace them. They love to try new things. They're willing to take risks. I imagine when you see these two dichotomies here, you're probably thinking of some students in your class. I know I am. And finally, for a fixed mindset person, challenges are something to avoid, actually, because you could fail, and that would make you look bad. So in addition, we could say that those with fixed mindsets take feedback often personally, and they give up more easily. Whereas a person with a growth mindset understands that mistakes are part of learning, and this person really appreciates constructive criticism because this person wants to improve. Do you think that mindset can be changed over time? Yes or no in the chat. You're correct. We can change mindset over time. So over time, we may change from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. Let me ask you one other question. Do you think mindset may differ for different areas of our lives? Type a yes or a no. That is correct. Mindset can be different for different areas of our lives. For instance, I could say that I'm a terrible cook. I don't want to even try. But when it comes to learning a new sport, I might be more willing to look foolish. Perhaps my motivation or interest is different, so I have a different mindset for that area of my life. So one thing that we can do when we see students who tend to seem as though they have a fixed mindset is this. One way we can support students in developing their growth mindset is through careful consideration of the feedback we give them. We need to give our learners realistic assessment of their own knowledge. And the way we can support that is by providing them with clear, specific, and accurate feedback, both on what they do well, as well as on what they need to improve, constructive criticism, in other words. We can reframe both positive feedback and constructive feedback to help our students better manage their errors in both routine classroom interactions and on assessments. As Carol Dweck advises, to help students develop a growth mindset, we should praise the process and students' effort, as well as their improvement over time, rather than praise the product. This will help students gain understanding that skills building takes practice and time. How exactly do we do this? Well, knowing that our students may struggle with both external and internal barriers to their success in our classes, of course we want to encourage them and we want to be positive in our feedback. However, even positive feedback can feed a fixed mindset rather than foster a growth mindset. Let's see how that can happen. Have you ever said this to a student in your class? I confess I have. That test was easy for you because you're smart. My intention was to congratulate the student and encourage her to keep trying, but the message can be the opposite. The message you may be sending is that the student doesn't need to try as hard next time. So what you could say instead is something like this. I can see that was interesting for you. Tell me what you did to review and prepare for the test. Now we're focusing on the process instead of the product. I confess I've said this before to my students. Your test score improved so much. Oh my goodness, look at your result. You went up 10 points. Good job. The student may then think that he doesn't need to continue to put in the effort with this, innocent feedback I gave. So instead, a better way to provide positive feedback is to say something like this. You worked really hard. Your efforts paid off. Look at this score. See what you can accomplish when you put in time outside of class studying. What will you do next to improve more? And here's a last example. Your project is great. You're a natural. Well, Carol Dweck's research and other research proves that there are not a lot of naturals out there. So what we could say instead, okay, that was great. You're ready for a more difficult challenge. Because we don't want the student just to rest on his laurels and think that it's always going to come easy to him or her. So as these examples show, reframing feedback can still encourage the students, but also can give students the message that there is still room to grow and improve. And then again, the process is as important as the product. One more point about this, Carol Dweck also points out that when students finish something very quickly or they have no mistakes and we give them praise for perfection or speed, then we're giving the message that we value speed and perfection. And Carol Dweck calls these the enemies of learning. So what can we say instead? If a student finishes an assignment or test very quickly, we could say, I guess that was too easy. That wasn't a good use of your time. Let's look for another assignment that will challenge you more so that you can really learn. Again, we need to make our praise of students authentic and praise them for trying hard rather than for correctness or speed. And always offer some sort of feedback that tells the student how he or she can improve. Now, on the other side of the coin, when students do not do well, let me go back one. When students do not go well and begin to use negative self-talk, we can intervene with feedback that uses growth mindset language. And this will reinforce to the students, again, that mistakes are part of learning. And we learn when we're challenged. Finally, success, it takes time and effort. So you can see a few examples. If a student says, well, yes, that was just too hard for me, we could say something like this. Well, if it were easy, you wouldn't learn. We learn when we are challenged. Another example, a student says, I'm not good at this. This would be a great teaching moment. Tell me which part was difficult. Let's look at it together. If a student says, I got it all wrong. Well, yes, mistakes are expected. That's how we learn. And the last example, I'll never get better at this. You could point again at students' progress and improvement over time, perhaps reminding the student where he or she was at when they first came to your class. So in the chat pods, you see 3, and they're examples of student negative self-talk. So there are 2 in each chat pod. So select one, any one of those 6 statements, and in the chat pod where that statement is located, if you could reframe, how could you say this differently? How could you give feedback to the student that would focus on improvement over time, or mistakes are part of learning, or focusing again on the process instead of the product? So go ahead and see if there's one that you often see in your classroom, a negative self-talk example that perhaps one of your students has used before, or that you hear often in your classes, and reframe that as a growth mindset feedback statement. I see that many people are typing, so we'll just take about one more minute. Okay, Leslie, your persistence and hard work has paid off. You did finish the test. Dessa says, I was in special ed classes. I need stuff that's easy. And what you could say, ooh, that's a tricky one. I suppose you could say, well, I'm here to help you, and anytime you get stuck, please come and talk to me. You can make it through this course, and I'm here to support you, something along those lines. Okay, and Lane, who teaches ESL, the students are afraid to move to the next level. And yes, you're right. When you tell them just to go give it a try, they usually stay in that next higher level. But they're just a little bit fearful of, not understanding, I guess. And Melissa, you work in a methodical way, and I really admire that in you. Oh my gosh, that would make the student feel so special if you said that. It's so important to give careful thought to your test answers, and you do. Yes, that's an excellent response, Dessa. What if we try something that might be a little bit tougher and just see how you do and reevaluate? Okay, going to the middle chat, Barbara. Any teacher can be easy on you. That doesn't take much effort. A teacher who cares is going to challenge you because she knows that you are intelligent and able to do whatever you decide to do. I think I'm going to make a copy of that and post it in my classroom. Natalie, my comprehension is terrible, is what some of your students say. And I think I'm slow in my brain. Yeah, so then, you could spout about neuroplasticity, but could be just a simple feedback like this. You do understand the material. You just need to give yourself the proper time environment to focus. And Dessa seconds my comment about Barbara's response. And then in the last chat pod, yeah, this is a great one, John. If at first you don't succeed, try again. Yet math is not just about numbers. Let's focus on the concept and understand the basics first. And Cecilia, the test was hard. It will help me know what I need to teach again. Please do your best so I can see where I need to help you next. That's wonderful. So you're using the test as a formative assessment to get feedback. And Dessa has a great response about anyone who says that math is hard. Math is music and numbers instead of notes. Okay. And I think what I saw repeated a couple of times here is that students want to be successful now. So we should really let them know that it takes a lot of time to become really good at something. And maybe you could think of an example from sports or maybe from music or any other sort of area where you can explain or even find the story of that person that they started a long time ago and put in many hours of practice to get to where they are now. So the same is true of school. And Melissa, one last one. I believe you will pass this class. You know why? I've watched your persistence in other areas, and I know you want to learn or you wouldn't be here. So pointing out the students' good personal attributes and helping them see that they can use what they have with your support to gain the skills they need and not give up. Thank you, everybody. A lot of wonderful things. And Cecilia, one last thing. She said, yeah, it's actually in Malcolm Gladwell's book, one of his books, if you've heard of him. He cites a study that said it takes 10,000 hours to be really good at something. So if you wanted to quote that, you could probably look it up and find it online. And he gives the example of the Beatles and different athletes and so on. Well, it looks like you all really like this topic because I still see some people typing, but we're past our halfway point time, so I'm going to have to forward to the next slide. But thank you for such great participation. Really wonderful. Okay, so a little bit more about how we can help students manage their errors. One thing we could do is also focus on the strategy for solving a problem or answering a question rather than on the answer. Problem solving and analyzing where one went wrong are skills that students would be able to use in other subjects and other areas of their lives. So that's an important skill to help them gain. And we should focus on teaching the strategy and rewarding it, Carol Dweck says. Again, process over product. And some of you mentioned this in the last activity. Challenge your students. What you can say and do, well, tell students that they will learn when class content is slightly above their current level rather than when it's just at or below their current level. And tell them that we really learn when we need to struggle a little with new content. And we learn to persist with hard challenges by having hard challenges. And finally, differentiate the instruction. If you have a class of students who are multi-level in different areas, try to provide a more challenging version of an assignment for those more advanced students. But make sure that your lower level students are not becoming too frustrated so that they don't give up. And perhaps it would be even helpful for your students to take an assessment in your class if they have the language ability to do so. A couple of you teach low-level ESL. I'm not sure that would be appropriate for them, but you could have them do an assessment about their mindset and provide them with a list of things to try to maintain or gain growth mindset. So before we end with the final strategy, let's pause a moment to reflect. In this discussion of growth mindset and managing errors, was there anything that made you pause for a moment, or maybe brought to your mind some strategy or activity that you used to do but you haven't done in a while? So if anything like that came up in your mind, go ahead and type it in the first chat pod. And if you have any questions before we go on, go ahead and type that in the second chat pod on the right. Or any comments would be fine too. Lane, this is really perfect. Weekly problem-solving activities, and what were 3 things you learned and how can you use them? So you're hitting on a point that is covered in this community of practice as well, and that's helping students see value in their the instruction you're providing. And it's always good to help students use their own words to say what they have learned and to make the connection with what you're teaching to their goals and their needs. And Barbara, she always loves new sources of information or inspiration. So she's got the book in her Amazon cart and will buy it. And Leslie, teaching our students about growth mindset is important to their success in attaining their goal. And you know, if you teach your students about growth mindset, that's information that they could use in their roles as parents, as employees, community members. So it's not just for school. And Teresita, reflection, what have they learned and what part of the lesson was difficult for them? So you could accomplish that through an exit ticket or some activity like that. And Barbara, okay. Yes, and just tell them, anything that is hard requires a bit of struggle. Okay, thank you for that. So, and you're right, John, math seems to be one of those difficult subjects that a lot of students want to say, I just can't do it. So we need to help them get over that block that they have in their minds and develop more of a growth mindset. So we're going to finish up with a final strategy, and this is stereotype threat. Have you heard of stereotype threat before? If yes, type a Y in the general chat pod on the left. If no, type N. No. Yes? Okay, good. Okay, to be honest, I hadn't either until I read a book about it. So, what is it? Stereotype threat is triggered in an individual when he or she is aware that there is a stereotype about a group to which she belongs. So, what does this mean for us in our classes? Well, this is another book you could put in your Amazon cart, and it is called Whistling Vivaldi by Claude Steele. And this stereotype threat comes up when a student has a thought that others are judging that student. And what that does is it disrupts the performance of the student, because their working memory that is needed for them to retain what they're learning, it decreases, actually, because students become distracted by these thoughts that others are judging him or her for the group to which she belongs. So in his book, Whistling Vivaldi, How Stereotypes Affect Us and What We Can Do, author Claude Steele gives the example of this. Something as simple as reporting the level of previous education on an intake form, which we all do, right? That can have a negative effect on student performance for students who have limited previous education. So some of you mentioned that is a common barrier that your students face, is they have in their mind that, I didn't finish high school, or I have limited education. So then when we draw their attention to it further, they get distracted by that and think that everyone is judging them for that. So when students, I'm sure you can understand that when students are distracted by these thoughts of self-doubt, then they underperform relative to their ability. So otherwise they may do great in class, but when this trigger comes, their performance decreases. What can we do? Well, this is from the book. Author Steele writes, if we want to overcome underperformance, if we want to open the door for many stereotyped students to learn and prosper in our society, we should, in addition to focusing on skill and knowledge, also focus on reducing these threats. Well, here are some ways that he said we can do this. He gives a few examples in his book. And I don't know if you have a paper nearby, but I'm going to give some specific examples, and I want you to make sure that you understand the strategy, because towards the end I'm going to ask you if you can think of a way that you could implement this in your classroom, actually. So the first strategy was this: to change the way you frame critical feedback and help students reframe their own explanations. So we already went through that just a little bit ago with growth mindset, but some examples: when a student says to you, this is too hard for me, you can point out that things that are too hard are worth working toward, and challenges mean that you're learning, and you see the other examples. So when we reframe our critical feedback, as we saw earlier, then we can help students overcome their negative self-talk. So that's the first thing. Another thing we can do to reduce the effects of stereotype threat is to foster group conversations between members of different groups. So I imagine that you use pairing group work in your class. It seems to be a staple of adult education. So how we could do this is by strategic grouping of students. And I don't remember which one of you wrote that you do different abilities grouping. So maybe you have more advanced students with lower level students, or the opposite, like ability grouping. But more that we can do is grouping that represents diversity, so not having groups stay together all the time in the class. First language groups, racial groups, and so on. And we can also start informal intergroup talk sessions. Because what happens then is when students are having this effect of negative stereotype threat, when they realize that there are other students outside of their group experiencing the same, then it's kind of like a calming relief that comes over them, because then they can free up, their thoughts to be better able to use their mental energy for schoolwork. And they'll stop thinking so much about others judging them based on the stereotypes about their group. So when students are interacting and studying with others outside of their usual groups in class, they're more likely to see that their stereotypes are not even accurate. And that helps them see that stereotypes about their own group and other groups are not accurate. And that kind of lessens the power of stereotype threat for them. And the next strategy is actually the third one out of 4. And another way to address the effects of stereotypes is that we can allow students to affirm their most valued sense of self. So what does that mean? Well, according to Claude Steele's self-affirmation theory, the basic human motive is to perceive oneself as good and competent. When we don't meet that expectation, we're always looking for an explanation. We're looking for an out. And we do that to try to guard our self-integrity. But some people project their low performance on their sense of self. So this theory holds that if individuals reflect on values that are personally relevant to them, they are less likely to experience distress and less likely to react defensively when they're confronted by information that contradicts or threatens their sense of self. So here's the example from the book. There was an experiment with middle school kids, and the researchers had students write down their 2 or 3 most important values, and then from there they selected those values and wrote a personal narrative paragraph about why these values were important to them. And it's really amazing, this simple exercise that was done early in the school year got these middle school students thinking about their values. It actually dramatically affected school performance for the minority students. And it reduced how much and how often students thought about racial stereotypes. So you can see that the effects of this self-affirmation theory, they seem to work. And they stayed with these kids for the next 2 years, and it lasted throughout that time. So again, because it occurred early in the school year, and going back to the beginning, things we can do from the beginning of our class, this might be something that we try. And right from the beginning, because they introduced this, those minority students didn't start feeling frustrations right away. And it helped them stop the low performance because they had self-value. Okay, and finally, we just have a few more minutes left. This was the 4th strategy that Claude Steele gave in his book, which is to help students develop a narrative about the setting that explains their frustrations and projects belonging, positive engagement, and success. So Teachers can provide counterexamples to the stereotypes. For instance, if you have those students who say, I had no education before I didn't finish high school, you could find a story of someone, maybe a former student, maybe yourself or someone you know, or a text or a poster or anything like that, and bring it into your classroom. So when they start using that explanation for their failures, you can say, no, 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 look at so-and-so. He or she was in the exact same position as you and succeeded and went on to accomplish her goals. So that really breaks the stereotype when students can see that there are others like him or her that have gone on to accomplish their goals. So in Claude Steele's book, he cited a research experiment to measure the impact of this personal narrative type of thing. And this is what happened. Researchers took Stanford students, and they had a group of African American students and white students. And they had all those students write letters to minority elementary school students about the expandability of human intelligence, so bringing in Carol Dweck's research actually, and the nature of learning and how the brain changes when we learn. And guess what? This simple task of writing this personal narrative and including this research-based information, what happened was the Black Stanford students' grades improved in the next semester. So it's just like when you tell yourself that you're good and that you can do it, it happens, right? So these are those 4 strategies, and I'm going to give you just a minute. I know that that was kind of fast for rather deep information, but if you have experience with any of those, or if any of them kind of ring true to you as something that you would do in your class, which one of these do you do now, if you do any of these? And which is one you haven't thought of before? And how would it look in your classroom if you tried to implement this strategy for reducing negative effects of stereotypes? Choose one and type in whatever comes to mind. And I'll draw your attention to the general chat on the right. We have here that Barbara seems to be a prolific book reader. She has a book called Values Clarification, Sidney Simon and Leland Howe. And that was in response to Lane's question about getting specifics about implementing values exercises in class, especially ESL. And Yetta says that intergroup work, so I think what you're referring to is fostering conversations between members of different groups may not work with your math students. So I'll just go through what people have entered so far. So for the first strategy, change the way you frame critical feedback, Lane says she teaches the lowest literacy level ESL, and yes, put up a poster that says mistakes help me learn, and point to it whenever a student mentions making a mistake in class. That's a great idea. I actually did this too, and I have a few posters up about fixed versus growth mindset, and we talked about it in class one time and read a short excerpt from Carol Dweck's book. And the book is wonderful because it gives advice about how we can implement different strategies as parents, as coaches, as teachers, as supervisors to help others grow their growth mindset. Natalie, never make fun of someone who speaks broken English. It means they know another language. That's what I always tell my students too when they get frustrated when 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 people they're trying to speak with in the community said that they don't understand what the student is saying. Yes. And I'll jump to the third one. Allow students to affirm their most valued sense of self. Having sensitivity to cultural aspects and celebrations, so important in our very diverse classrooms here in California. Cecilia says students who say they can't learn because they're too old, or children can learn fast and adults can't. You point out that how busy they are doing things that are important to them. Yeah, so the example I give to my older students too is like our brain is like a sponge. The young people's brain is maybe has a lot of water in it, and the old person's brain who hasn't been in school for a while, you need to start getting it wet and be patient, and it's going to be able to soak up more information as you go on, but they have to be patient with themselves. Okay, going back. I mean, there's so many wonderful things that you're writing here. This is great. Group conversation enhances respect with students of varied cultural backgrounds, and actually have not experienced stereotype threat in my beginning low ESL class. You're right. This would probably be more impactful in adult secondary classes, but of course, you mentioned a couple of times when we were brainstorming, those students who do have broken educational histories that are not at a high level, sometimes they're carrying that as an excuse, really. Okay, Melissa, having students put different things in their writing. Yes. Student ambassadors go through the ESL program, Leslie. And I think, yes, with our diverse classrooms, it all begins with us showing that we not just tolerate, but that we respect and we really appreciate the diversity that our students bring is a really important thing. So it's actually time up. I'm so sorry to cut off our excellent conversations that we're having here, but it's time for me to wrap up. If you have any last comments or questions, if you can put those in the general chat pod to the left. And I'll mention that if you want to learn more, we have a new community of practice that will be available August 1st. And it covers these strategies that you saw here, as well as 7 others. So if you're interested in bringing this to your agency, it would be 2 face-to-face sessions, some online work, and a capstone project that you do. So you can contact Mary Louise Baez. There's her email if you're interested. And yes, Barbara says, can you email us the notes from this session? There is a handout. If you didn't receive it, it should have come through your email. And a certificate, that's a good question. I'll let the experts answer those, but thank you, everybody.
If you would like a certificate, you can email Vicki, or I'll put my email here and you can email me. We won't automatically send a certificate because not everyone needs it, but if you would like a certificate, email me and we'll send you one. And what was the other question? Oh, the notes.
The notes from the session.
Barbara, you might be referring to the chat, the different ideas in the chat. And I think I'll do the same thing. So we'll put that together, and it'll be available. If you want it, just email me and I'll send it to you. It's not something that everyone probably wants. There's a lot, there's a lot to sort through to find the nuggets in there because we had a lot of different chats. So it'll be available though. Thank you. Yeah,
thank you, everybody.
So if you go up to your indicating the guy that has his hand up, the last selection there is applause. So let's give Christy A round of applause. She did a great job, and she finished
Thank
like
you.
exactly on time. So thank you all. When we close
Thank
the
you.
meeting, you will uh, an evaluation form should pop up, and if you don't see it, it might be behind the screen that you're looking at. We would really appreciate your evaluation. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Barbara, email me, mthatcher@air.org. Or Barbara, I guess you're just asking me now. Okay, got it.
Thank you, everyone. I'll close out the meeting.